Welcome to the tutorial over 4-3 solving quadratic equations by factoring. Your new vocabulary is factored form and the FOIL method, and you can see the FOIL concept below. You can also call the FOIL method double distribution. F stands for first terms, O stands for the product of the outer terms, I stands for the product of the inner terms, and L stands for the product of the last terms. The factored form of quadratic equation is 0 equals a parentheses x minus p close parentheses x minus q in the equation, and p and q represents the x-intercepts of the graph of the equation. Example 1. Write a quadratic equation in standard form with 1/2 and -5 as its roots. So first we want to start with the factored form. From the last slide, 0 equals a times x minus p times x minus q, where p and q are going to be the roots. Okay, so p is going to be equal to 1/2 and q is equal to -5. So now we're going to actually plug and chug into this equation. We get 0 equals, and we don't have anything for a, so we're just going to let it be 1. We're going to have x minus 1/2 times x minus -5. From there, we're going to use the FOIL method, and I'm going to clean up this double negative. FOIL, or better known as double distribution. We're going to take our first terms, and the product of that is 0 equals x squared. Then we're going to take the outer terms, so x times 5, it's going to be positive 5x. We're going to take our inner terms, so -1/2 times x, which is minus 1/2 x. And then we're going to take our last terms, so -1/2 times 5, which is -5/2. Now, in order for this to be standard form, we don't want fractions, so first we need to actually combine like terms, and then we will get rid of our fractions. So when we combine like terms, we get 0 equals x squared plus 9/2 x minus 5/2. Now, to get rid of the fractions, we see that we have a 2 on bottom, so we're going to multiply everything by 2. So I get 0 equals 2x squared plus 9x minus 5. And here's your equation in standard form. For our next key concept is the zero product property. For any real numbers a and b such that if a times b equals 0, then either a equals 0 or b equals 0 or both. And for a and b equal to 0. For example, if we have our two factors, we can set each of those equal to 0, and we can figure out what x is to make that 0. So we're going to try 2 examples. First of all, we're going to factor by using the greatest common factor. So you want to look between your two factors here and see what's the biggest constant you can pull out, and if you can pull out a variable. So what I would do, I know that 3 goes into both of those terms, so I'm going to factor out a 3, and I can actually factor out a y as well. And what that leaves me with is 3y plus 1 is equal to 0. So the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to use my zero property rule. I can now set each of those factors equal to 0. So 3y equals 0, and 3y plus 1 equals 0. And I can solve each of these for y. In the first one, if I divide by 3 on both sides, I know that y is equal to 0. And then the other one, we're going to solve by subtracting 1 from both sides. And we get 3y is equal to -1. And then we're going to divide by 3. And we get y is equal to -1/3. And so now we just solved, and we got y is equal to 0 and y is equal to negative 1/3 as our answer. Our next example, we're going to solve 5a squared minus 20a equals 0. Alright, so the first thing I see is that these two have a 5 in common, so I can factor out a 5. And they also have an a in common, and the biggest one I can pull out is 1a. So that leaves me with just an a. And you can kind of think of this as if I take 5a squared and I divide it by 5a, I'm only left with 1a. So that's how I'm getting my factors. Minus, well, 20 divided by 5 is 4, so we're left with 4. And a divided by a is just 1, so it's just a minus 4 is equal to 0. Now we can use the zero property and take each of these factors and set them equal to 0 and figure out what a is. So 5a equals 0, and a minus 4 equals 0, and solve for a in both cases. On the first one, I'm going to divide by 5 on both sides, and we get a is equal to 0. And the next one, I'm going to add 4 to both sides, so that means a is equal to 4. And those are my two answers. Example 3, perfect squares and difference of squares. The first thing you want to check is your first and last terms if they are perfect squares. And we know that x times x is x squared, so it is a perfect square. And we know that 3 times 3 is equal to 9, so we know it's a perfect square as well. Also, the next thing we want to check is whether or not the middle term is equal to 2ab. So 2ab. And in this case, a is equal to x, and we have b is equal to 3, because that's what the square root of 9 is. So we have 6x equal to 2, and we know that a is x and b is 3, which that checks out as well. So this is a perfect trinomial. So that means we're going to take x, we're going to take 3 because we're going to take the two factors and put squared, and then you have to figure out whether or not it's going to be positive or negative. Well, here we have a positive and we have a negative, so since the negative is the middle sign, it's going to be x minus 3 squared. B says solve y squared equals 36. So this is the case where all you have to do is square root both sides. And anytime you square root, you have to put plus or minus in front of the square root of 36. So that means y is equal to plus or minus 6. Next, we're to factoring trinomials. We have x squared minus 2x minus 15 equals 0. First thing you want to do is figure out what are the factors of 15. What's going to give you a negative 15? We have negative 1 and 15. We have negative 3 and 5. And we have negative 5 and 3. And we have 1 and negative 15. And if we take these things and we add them together, let's see, negative 1 plus 15 is 14. Negative 3 plus 5 is 2. Negative 5 plus 3 is negative 2. And then we have 1 times negative 15. No, sorry, 1 plus negative 15, which is going to be negative 14. So what we're looking for is two factors that multiply together to give me a negative 15 and will add to get me a negative 2, because that's what our middle term is. And the only thing that satisfies these two conditions is negative 5 and 3. So we start with our two factors, and we start with x and x. We're going to have negative 5 and positive 3. So now it's factored, and now we can actually figure out what our x values are. We're going to set x minus 5 equal to 0 and x plus 3 equal to 0. When we solve each of these, we get x equals to 5 and x equals negative 3. On the next one, this time we actually have a 5 in front of my x squared term, so we have to take 5 and 24 and we have to multiply those together, and we get 120. So we need the terms that are going to multiply to get 120, and then are going to give us a 34 when we get the sum. So let's think of the factors of 120. Let's see, we have 2 and 60, 5 and 24. Oh, I missed one. We have 4 and 30. And it looks like I found my pair 4 and 30 because when you add those up, you get 34. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to rewrite my middle term. So we have 5x squared, and I'm going to rewrite this as 30x plus 4x, because if you really think about that, those two things added together really do equal 34. So I'm going to put plus 30x plus 4x plus 24. And I can't fit my equal 0. Now I'm going to factor by grouping these two. Take the greatest common factor out. So the greatest common factor between 5x squared and 30x is going to be 5x. And that leaves me with an x plus 6. And when you factor by grouping, you want to get the same factors. Hold on, let me erase some of this so you can actually see what I'm doing. That's better. Alright, so I'm factoring by grouping, and now on the second set, I need to factor out a 4. And I get x plus 6 equals 0. So now we can see our factors. We see that our factors are x plus 6 and also 5x plus 4. So 5x plus 4 and x plus 6 equals 0. Now to figure out what x is, I'm going to set each of these factors equal to 0. 5x plus 4 equals 0. X plus 6 equals 0. Alright, so on the first one, subtract 4 from both sides. Get 5x is equal to negative 4. Divide by 5, we get x is equal to negative 4/5. And for the second one, I'm going to subtract 6 from both sides and get x equals negative 6. So these are my two factors, x equals negative 4/5 and x equals negative 6. For our last example, architecture. The entrance to an office building is an arch of the shape of a parabola whose vertex is the height of the arch. The height of the arch is given by h equals 9 minus x squared, where x is the horizontal distance from the center to the arch. Both h and x are measured in feet. How wide is the arch at ground level? So the first thing we need to do to find the width of the arch at ground level is to find the distance between the two zeros. So first I'm going to rewrite this equation, 9 minus x squared equals 0. Now we actually need to switch these around. So negative x squared plus 9 equals 0. And I can actually multiply this by negative 1, so that way I don't have a negative in front of my x squared. So if I multiply by negative 1, it just changes my signs to get x squared minus 9 equals 0. And this is actually our difference of squares. So we know that the square root of x is x, the square root of negative 9 is, the square root of 9 is 3. So we can write our two factors, x plus 3, x minus 3 equals 0. So using the zero product property, I can take each of these and set them equal to 0. So x plus 3 equals 0. And then x minus 3 equals 0. So that means my two factors are equal to x equals negative 3 and x equals 3. So if I think about the distance of those on a number line, this is negative 3 and this is 3. The whole distance is 6. So that actually tells me that the width of the arch at ground level is 6. And that's the end of our tutorial. Thanks for watching.